Right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It is an honor and a privilege to have all gathered here today, and then we're to be discussing something that I think is very important, a very important topic that's core to humanity, and I think that everyone relates to, everyone has been part of it, and everyone is still even part of it. Because, like as they say, education goes far beyond the four walls of school. It's something that really does redirect and repositions humanity, and it is indeed a force that we all get to be a part of until the day we exit the surface of this earth. And even when we're gone, what we'll leave behind, our perspectives, our theories, and our framework still stays on as legacies that would be forever made reference to. So I think it is an honor that we all are gathered here today to speak truth to what education truly means to us and how it could, in many ways, inspire the world that we live in. And I think this year's theme on International Day of Education couldn't be more profound. It couldn't be more impactful to have included and thought of the youths as key agents of
Oh,
change and how they could recreate education and contribute to the beauty and the power of what education should look like moving forward. So I think it is an honor that we are all gathered here today. It's an honor that we've got Miss Corey, we got Dr. Wan and Dr. Yasser from the various departments and various in the education field to contribute and speak wisdom to what we will now will pass on as something that we can make reference to in time. So on behalf of G-SEL Network, which has put all of this together, I think we will be great to be able to speak truth to what education truly means from the lenses of youth today. So thank you all for joining in. And this just officially brings us to the debate or the contribution of what we think youths, how youths could contribute, or how systems and governance could impact and influence youth's contribution. So to begin, we'll be going through multiple questions that will speak truth and be able to share wisdom to all of this. So that way, at the end of today's conversation, we'll be leaving with something amazing. Great. So to begin, I'm going to start with Miss Corey. Miss Corey, thank you for joining in, and I think it is an honor to have you here. I guess before we all begin, can we all we might want to introduce ourselves individually, right? Just a brief introduction before we dive into the panel, so that at least the audience can know who we are, the participants can know who we really are. So, Corey, please introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Corey Howard, and I am a first generation student. I grew up in the Appalachian Mountain area in the United States, and I am now a PhD candidate at King's College London studying mental health, specifically in 18 to 30-year-olds. But in my master's, I have looked at adolescents' mental health as well. And so I'm focusing specifically on how social and behavioral and systems such as like family, community, et cetera, and into local policy, et cetera, and how that impacts the mental health of and how that can impact their futures as well, which I think really ties in today. So thank you so much for having me.
Great. It is an honor to have you here. And Dr. Wan, please, a brief introduction.
hello everyone. My name is Chung Huang, and you can call me Huang. I'm the senior lecturer from University of Greenwich. My main area of research about the green finance, financial liberalization, and I have several publications in the area of the green loans and environmental purpose friendly loans or other instrument. And I think today's seminar, the webinar, quite related to the area I'm interested in. And also I'm the member of British Academy, and I'm the member of the King's Fellow program for the climate change. So we're happy to join the webinar today.
Great. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for joining in. And over to Dr. Yasser, please.
Hi, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Yasser Shiab. I'm a lecturer in leadership and management at Buckinghamshire University. I'm I think I'm a senior fellow now of the higher education in the UK. Application submitted, everything is fine. And yeah, on my research area in leadership, transformational leadership, innovation, performance, and recently AI, trying to include the AI within my research. And I'm super happy to be here. Hopefully, this contribution will help somehow with youth and the governance policymakers and others. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining in. And so, undoubtedly, I believe that for sure. You will, all that you're doing does a lot in so many ways contribute to what youth, the pathway that we all are thinking and envisioning the youth are going to be forging moving forward. Yes. Did you have your hand raised up? I
Hello,
see
sir.
that.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi. How are you?
Hi, sir. I'm Mr. Anwar Khan, and I'm utilizing the business funding for the UK. Business funding fund for them, and 22K, 20, 80K, or 100Ks. They can promote their business. They can earn more money. So I'm youngster to give up the finance, and I'm working for the finance last 15 years to UK market.
Great. Thank you for letting us know that.
And my education background is yeah. And my education background is I study in the business diploma engineer into UK, and also I'm very soon I'm gonna do in PhD to your GWEL system, and also regardless. So whatever my friends circle, my family members, they loves your events programs actually. So every time I come to your event and support their makeup by sponsors.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think your face. That's a familiar face. I saw you last time when we had our event at the East London University.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks.
the Mustas guy. I'm the Mustas guy. You remember
Yes,
me? Mustas
yes, I
guy.
do. I do remember you. Thank you. Thank you so much for always joining in. It's a pleasure to always have you. Yeah, that's indeed a very great support. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna get started now. And I have the first question here for Corey. So Corey, this is a question that is within the conference of visionary and systematic changes. So when we look at we're going to look at beyond education now. So by reimagining and envisioning a prosperous future for youths, for today's youths, what role can nations play in building and safeguarding the economy?
That's a really great question. Thank you. For me, I would say there's kind of three main areas that I really see this kind of pulling in, kind of like my specialty, and again, like where we're going, focusing on youth. So those three areas are really first to treat youth mental health and mental health as in general, as people grow and develop as a core economic infrastructure and not just an add-on. The second one is building prosperity through those different social determinants of health that we know can impact people's ability to succeed. So whether that's education and jobs, in some income, security, housing, safety, inclusion, et cetera. And the last is really using that national budgeting and governance to like lock in long-term prevention. And I can dive a little bit deeper into each of those if we've got time. So starting with that first one, treating youth mental health as a core economic infrastructure, this really safeguards our economy and the world economy because we know that mental health is shaped by both social and economic conditions, not just the biology of a person. And so if we have those social inequalities, it raises risks for common mental health disorders. And so we know that making economic policy that is mental health policy and vice versa. And so that is a way to really safeguard that relationship. So if we know that we're having, what some might call like a mental health epidemic, that can deteriorate, our mental capital, which can also impact, right, the general financial capital of, towns, counties, all the way up to like the world global trade as well, if we're not having people who are learning, who are producing, and who are innovating. And right now, looking at the World Bank stats, if we continue on this path for mental health disorders and we don't get in and start doing some prevention and treatment, then we can lose trillions by even just 2030. So in the next, less than 5 years now, actually, in the new year, primarily through that early onset and productivity loss, because we know if people aren't finishing their education as youth, right, and having those good experiences, they're not moving on to those next steps in education and are losing those opportunities. And so really to, again, safeguard this, we want to think about youth mental health, even though it can be preventative and it is upstream, which is really difficult for some people to conceptualize. We want to be thinking about embedding prevention in education, and not just as a treatment, not just in employment, but thinking about like the housing and the social protection as well, which really leads into my second point around building prosperity through those determinants. The 2025 UN World Youth Report explicitly linked youth mental health determinants, right, to education, employment, poverty, and social attitudes, with more inequalities, right, creating more mental health outcomes. And so we want to really start emphasizing that whole person and that whole community approach, in which people are born, grown, how they live, work, and age, because we know that that outweighs access to healthcare alone, is that community and that protective factor. And so when governments are reducing poverty and insecurity, they are improving operation. It's protecting stability, which are protective factors that buffer against the long-term like fiscal strain and like social unrest that can exist when those opportunities are lost. So my last point around bringing in that and governance long-term prevention, we are seeing some countries put structures in that do require decision makers to consider long-term well-being and prevention. We have seen a similar approach in Wales, like those problems and integrate actionally upstream to improve that well-being, which will then create those better education, mental health outcomes. And so we want to think about, again, not just the cost currently, but the future cost. Well, and so we know that cure, again, America. So sorry for that math this morning on conversion to kilograms. But the idea, right, is really that it costs so much less if we get in with today's youth and help them succeed. And so we know that this prevention reduces downstream costs through health, justice, and loss of productivity, and preserves future tax base and human capital as well. So I think those are kind of the three main areas that really come to mind for me as someone who works with youth in the mental health and education space, is that accessibility, and then how that can, again, impact their long-term opportunities for success and the long-term consequences for that as well.
Great. I love the way you actually spoke a lot of truths to the consequences. So this is not just something that we would actually, I think if governance and policies were to be put in place, they really do have to want to take into consideration the consequences and all that there is that will be for a loss for us. And I think that's where you spoke a lot of truths to, and I think that's really great. Thank you so much. It just ties in back now into Dr. Yasser's question. Now, Dr. Yasser, now let's in line and very connected to what Corey has just spoken truth to, we're now going to be looking at resourcefulness and impact. And the way that really shows up in the participation of how youths can really be able to contribute. Now, how do you think the moving forward beyond symbolic seats, because we have a lot of symbolic seats at various agencies, to ensure the youth have actual voting power, we're actually, it's not a paradox that we're actually speaking today on the day the United Nations have created, but they do really have a lot of power and contribution and how they could contribute. So let's say beyond voting powers and veto rights.
Or contributing more with decision making, not only allowing them just to talk about it in general, right? Uh, we need to redistribute the decision rights as well. So they need to be involved in every single decision in different ways. We need also to make sure that we share the authority as well, give them the access to it. It's not only hearing what they're saying, but actually taking into action what they are saying. We can include like embedding youth in executive governance structure, establishing the youth vote or veto ready flag. We need to make sure that they are hired, let's say, linked with the governance structure through shared decision rights, veto mechanism, and conditional authorities. Uh, Without the power redistribution, participation remain performative. When we look at it, as Curry mentioned as well, she's dealing with the 18 to 30s old, which is basically the heart of youth, right?
Right.
Now, when I mentioned the inclusive or inclusion within decision making and taking, uh, we know that there is a gap between the people who are taking decisions and the people who are uh, trying to take decisions.
Right.
And I think we need to take advantage of this gap, the generation gap between all of us, because the new generation, they are adapt faster, using technology faster. Uh, they know how to, well, they are on the ground basically right now. So they know how exactly to collect data faster, how to give decisions, to raise it from their perspective, because it's not only about the old generation. Now we have two generation, and I believe I'm one of the lucky people. I'm between. So I managed to be with the old generation, and now I'm with the new generation as well. And I can see how they are looking for or trying to be heard, sorry. So basically, the only thing and the most important thing is that we need to empower them, give them the right, give them the chances, believe in them. And I know sometimes the old generation, they have the experience, they have the knowledge, they have the wise, let's say. Give them the chance with your wise, with your experience, with their new adaptability, with the new innovation things that they are doing right now. If we mix it, if we are being sure the just talking or listening part to implementing whatever they are thinking about, that will be great.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much for speaking truth to that. That was really very powerful. I love the way you were actually walked us through differentiating, because more often than not, we do not actually get to understand that there are those who are actually um, pretentiously on the pathway of creating policies and having us believe that they are, but whereas they really aren't creating policies. And then vis-a-vis those who are really in charge and those who are creating the policies that do shape the trajectory of where the youths are going. Now, you've spoken truth now to policies, you've spoken truth to how well governance or systems can actually contribute. But there is also a very important element that every one of us here would obviously agree to, which is finance. There's not so much that a lot of youths can do if they wouldn't be empowered financially. And so that's why, Dr. Warren, you were speaking truth to that. I want you to walk us through. There have been a lot of barriers, and I think it just does. From what I have observed, and we'll follow up to a lot of all of this explanation, occurrence that we've seen around the world. It's not even tied to a country, neither is it tied to a continent. It's become a global, a human limitation where a lot of youths would have to struggle with trying to have access to banks. They would have to go through checks, and so there are a lot of layers that they have to go through. How could that in any way even be easy? in which world and in what policies or what economic situations will it be favorable for youths to be empowered, knowing and putting into consideration that we do believe that they can change a lot in the future, and also remembering that they are the skilled and resourceful ones, like Dr. Hilsa had just pointed out. So, can you please speak truth to that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel, for your question. I think it's quite important question for every single country, rather go on now. So let's maybe can I maybe just start like define the young people or the youth who they are. So I believe just come from the common practice or perception. They are the people who age from 18 to 30. That's somehow we try to define the sample in every survey. And now I just want to bring some data from gov.uk and partnership with the Prince Trust survey. We find that 2 in 5 young people in the survey, they have the idea for the products or service and they want to launching the product to the market. And 54 of them would like to run the business and the area they're interested in. For example, the technology, e-commerce, green innovation, or creative sector. However, 82% of them feel the business sector is difficult because they have a lot of barrier to access. And you mentioned before, economics or finance is one of the barrier that makes the business become quite challenging for the young people in the survey. And also characteristics of the generation. We know that the youth will favor the future customer and motivation for economic growth. So just think about the characteristic of this demographic group. They have high entrepreneurial intent, especially in metro city like London, Manchester, Birmingham. However, high intent or ambition is not always high correlation with the resilience. And I remember Corey mentioned about before about the mental health or resilience because they have a lot of ideas, but if their ideas fail, and then how they can receive and can bounce back. So it's another factor. Also, interestingly, following the survey from Enterprise Nation, the people who under 35, they twice or 2 times have more interest in social and environmental issues compared with the people who over 35. And also we have quite, in the UK, we have quite high diversity in the background. So it is quite very obvious nowadays. Yep. And before I answer the question from Daniel about the barrier, so I just think about opportunity and challenge they have now. For the young people, they have a lot of resources support them from the family, from the school, university, from the society. However, the opportunity now become more and more limited. Why? Because they have more high intense competition. So competition maybe come from their peers, from their friends. The competition come from the existing market because the old generation are the people who already set up the business long time ago, and now they have economy of scale, they have a lot of resource, and now it's very challenge for the young people who can start the new idea and compete with those market, and also they have to think about the new trends. The trends update every year, yeah, every day. So that's why following the report from the British Business Bank, they surveyed and then they found that the startup and young business likely have the bank loans rejected. So likely, if they want to apply for any loan from the bank, they will be rejected. So if it's not true. But I think it's quite understandable here because for the lending or any finance market, we have the free market for competition for financing. And on the perspective of the lender or from the financial system, of course, I have to select and filter the segment of the client that less risky, more certainly that they can collect the loans back in the future. And also they have to think about the return on their investment. And that's why if we let the free market operating for financing is quite understandable. And that's why we need some intervention from the government or from any institution to support to fix the failure of the free market system. So, Daniel, I would like, so shall we move to some of the policy, or I just mentioned about the necessity, or should we go with some of the policy? Yeah. So I think, so how the government, they can support them. So, I mean, they can support them direct or indirect way. And I believe that's just something already happen and take place in the UK. For example, for the direct supporting, the government can treat or they can consider the loans offered to the startup or business like the public goods. So there are many controversies around that because, a public goods is somehow the government can interfere to the market if the market system they doesn't work automatically. Yeah. So I know that in the UK now we have the British Business Bank. That's somehow of the form of the economic development bank. They can support the funding for just startup for the young business whose the loans likely be rejected by the financial market.
Sure.
And the second, the government can support in the indirect way. Indirect way here does mean the government or institution, they can cooperate with the bank. For example, they can co-funding, co-lending the loans to the startup. Yeah. So the idea is about we have the first loss capital. So first loss capital, that means the government or any institution, they can co-lend the loans to the startup by the proportion. And if happen, like if the business goes bankrupt, and then the first loss capital offered by the government will be the first layer of the capital to absorb the loss first. So that means we try to reduce the risk for the bank or any commercial bank, any institution who want to offer the loans to the market. So that's why we try to increase the incentive for the institution with the government. They can support the startup or the young business together. And also, I think nowadays in the market, we have the venture capital and it's very popular now. So for venture capital, the funder, instead of becomes a lender, now they can become the co-owner with the business. Yeah. And also now they have the fintech technology. So that's why you can have the however, because that's what happened recently for Silicon Valley Bank happened for the venture capital. Just mean that's the ideas, but to put the ideas to the practice, we have to think much about the monitoring, or supervising, because the young people or the youth generation, they have a lot of idea, they have the motivation, but they still need the support or mentoring from family, from their friends, from the network, from institution, from university. Yes, so that's some of the ideas I try to bring. And of course, we still have, I believe we have a lot of issue for the discussion there.
Right. But that was quite a lot. You actually you dive deeply into it and how does all go through. And as I should have been, because when we talk about these are barriers. So I love the way you actually walked us through all the possibilities and how it similarly could be that youths can actually go through all of these hurdles and be able to be supported. Now, but then it's also very interesting to know that all that you've said would actually not be functional if governance would not think of budgets. So budgets becomes a very important key factor here. And that just ties into what Corey was speaking truth to. So to Corey, when you think of intergenerational equality or equity, as we would have it, we would understand it to be, in what word is to speak? I want you to speak to hope and maybe a little bit of faith in how we could see the world moving into a situation where regardless of the generation, right, the youth will be supported and are there budgets? Is it possible the nations could actually have budgets for this? Have they had in the past? Is there something that they could potentially have? And if they do, what would that look like? I would appreciate if you speak true to that.
Yeah, sure. So I think the first thing to really tackle here is something that Dr. Yasser spoke about in his answer, which was this idea around we're making policies for people who are impacted but aren't able to speak, or that we're not listening to, or we're listening to and then not acting on their feedback. And so I think the first thing we want to think about there is, how are we looking at that duty of care? And can we set up systems where we are doing, in my world, we would call it like a lived experience panel. Like, how are we bringing in the people that these policies are impacting? And so my first, kind of like recommendation in this space would be to create some type of like future generations panel. We've seen this a lot, right? In nonprofits and NGOs, the UN has one, right, where they select folks that are finishing secondary school, who are maybe on a gap year before going to university, or interning during university. But a government that has put one together actually is Wales again, and they've put together this Future Generations Commission. And the role of that is to have that long-term thinking of what is the, how do they make and promote a sustainable principle and safeguard those future needs. And so I can't tell you kind of like in depth what that looks like, or how they do the recruitment, or those types of pieces, but I do know that they have that panel and a commissioner that does kind of oversee those pieces and works with policymakers to ensure that. So I think that would be probably one of the most important things before we could even get into, right, what do they do and what does that look like? It's really, again, how are we bringing them to the table? And not just are we bringing them to the table, but then are we listening to what they have to say? So if we get that far, then I've got a couple more points. So the first one we really want to think about is this idea around a youth check, which the European Economic and Social Committee explicitly recommends this already. But it is this like systematic, intergenerational input that is done by a survey that they have, that they call this youth check, that they use for like budget and reviewing the budgets to identify what those generational impacts are, and breaking out that survey data by the different groups. Because we can look, right, we can separate that data out by the age of the respondents, and be able to look at how do they view it. And then depending on the types of data we have, right, be able to project what that might look like, or what the impacts could be, not just on the current generation, but generations to come, right? And we can see that type of prediction happening in a lot of different spaces. The two that I would really focus on here is going to be the well-being budgeting and the green budgeting. So for well-being budgeting, we want to think about how can we, again, if we get this beautiful committee of young folks to be given their opinion, right, and be empowered and have the budget and have people listening, we want to think about how can we organize a budget around well-being objectives, because we know that impacts GDP. But if we're looking again at that prevention, we don't have to necessarily be looking at the long-term outcomes, because we can predict those items, right, statistically. And so in New Zealand, they do have this well-being actually, and it explicitly prioritizes mental health and youth and child well-being. And it includes really large specific commitments, including funding for frontline mental health services, suicide prevention, and it really is that shift to upstream outcomes. So that, I think, is a really important piece. And the other piece that in my opinion, this panel would want to be looking at is this, again, idea around green budgeting, which we kind of just as well, which is this idea of how are we assessing the measures and tagging whether it helps or harms climate and environmental objectives. This is really useful in central policy because it does shape long-term risks and resilience. There's a ton of data out there that you can look at, even just here in London, with people and access to green spaces. So the closer you live to a common or a park versus those who are in more of what we would call like a concrete jungle, and how that impacts when we like moderate for all other variables, right? Regardless, et cetera, we can get access to green spaces is impacting their mental health. So we would want to think about having a practical tool to align fiscal decisions with those climate objectives and monitoring the climate impact of the budget decisions. Because we know that climate shocks and degrading environment worsen the social determinants of health. And that, again, is going to impact mental health stressors, which aligns, again, with those future burdens and instability that would be impacted kind of across in our environment to work and GDP and then like family stability as well. So those would kind of be my top things. Is first, we got to get the right people in there and then give them, again, that power to really be looking at these things. And yes, well-being and green budgeting would be the first two things that I would.
Great. It's so cool and so profound how does all look into the international policies, basically, all the way from Europe to the United Nations, back to the United Nations, and even countries that are really very international that could really contribute as key factors. But one thing that strongly comes to mind is, and I think this has always been the doubt for nations, especially nations that are not always included in the internationalization of those policies. So to that, I would want Dr. Yasser to have us understand in what world and is it possible for all of these international policies to be localized? Is there a way that most of this youth and far away and far into the world can actually benefit from all of those policies? Because as they do sound, in some parts and ends of the world, they would just be as foreign could be. It would need to be translated into their reality. It would need to be transported into their reality. So while all of that has been beautifully written down, like Corey has just pointed out, they do really exist. But our greatest fear will be, are they just only on fancy pages on websites? Are they just only on beautiful papers? How can they really translate and be localized into those countries? So, Dr. Yasser, please speak truth to that.
Thank you so much. It's really interesting. And one word before moving there, I'm going to stop in it. Corey mentioned that we need to put the right people in the right in order to make sure that the policy are implemented right. How we can get there, Corey, I think we can make it by succession planning. So we have actually a real good leaders right now. They have a lot of experience who can implement and make sure that the youth are taking advantage of their expertise. But we have the dark side of leadership, we call it. Let's say, I win, you lose, when it comes to this. But we need to make sure that we have a collaborative, let's say, environment in order to make sure that the youth are being prepared for the next level, right? Now, back to the localization, I think it's through shifting from the national level to maybe micro lab or micro leadership ecosystem, we can use it in order to make sure that the youth are doing. How we do it? Because producing solutions from local data, because each one of us, they know their area better than anyone else. So if we use the youth that we have, we can produce real data solution from this data agencies and from a live, let's say, a lived experience. Three pathways we might be able to do the localization. As I mentioned, the first one is the micro labs in the schools, and how we can do that school transition project. So basically, we are giving the youth to be entrepreneurs. Basically, we are giving them the responsibility from now on, from school. After, definitely that will be after spreading awareness, right? So we need to make sure that they know what they are doing, and they have already, they know, but they need to find someone to actively listening to them and then act on it. And the second one is circle economy initiative and neighborhood-based social. And these labs can turn the SDGs, as mentioned, action prototypes, right? With measurable outcomes, which is the most important thing. So you can talk about success, but how you measure it? I need data, right? Youth can bring you an actual data. Then we can map the local challenges, you know, uh, because they are on the ground. Again, I mentioned this word again. They can collect real-time data by knowing unemployment, let's say, uh, constraints, gender, neighborhood, sorry, skills gap. They lived in it. So basically, generate evidence for policymakers instead of generic international or level SDG metrics. So basically, we are targeting the nation, but locally, let's start making sure we have an actor for each area. We don't have just like a national survey and all right, this area or this country or this level, they have some problems. No, we need an actual data. And then co-creating the a local economic compact as well. As you mentioned, commissioners, we need to build the trust relationship between all generation, the new generation with the youth, right? We need to build that relationship to make sure that for their psychological safety as well, right? So basically, give them the trust, let them try, even if they did something wrong. That nothing wrong with that, right? Awareness. Make sure act like a mentor for them. Act like a mentor, right? Give them the chance. Not only, all right, yeah, I've heard you. You know, differentiate between listening and active listening is a big gap. Listening, I'm gonna think that's all right. I'm not gonna think about anything you mentioned. Active listening, that means sometimes I'm taking notes, sometimes I'm acting or reacting based on whatever I've been hearing from the youth. So yeah, basically, youth can localize the SDGs as we said, becoming micro policy entrepreneurs, right? We can collect data, prototyping, community solutions, and negotiating a local economic compact grounded in live realities. And I hope this answers your question somehow.
It really did. It really, really did. And then so happy how you actually spoke truth
Thank
to entrepreneurship. But that's the future. That's what's actually the governing power and what really does shifts and makes the generation a lot more different than the ones before. It just tied into what Corey had said earlier, which I talked about into intergenerational gap and just trying to make sure that that doesn't really exist. So it's osmosis. Um, Dr. Warren, you will be now speaking truth on the back of what Dr. Yasin has just all now explained about entrepreneurship. I want you to please help us understand how possible that would be. How can this youth be empowered? We all know now that it is an innovative age. There are multiple ideas, more than one, that would come up every other day. And a lot of the way the ideas are coming up, they come up right on the back of every new idea that's just been launched. And that's very interesting. And again, it goes back again to finance. In what way can they be financed? Would they are bigger older companies open for collaborations? Is in what world are they going to be, and what is the equity uh, implications like? Is there a total rip off? Do the young founders have a say in how much they would have for a kick and how much investors are supposed to get? Walk us through the possibilities and the dynamics of how all of that can be smoothed and easily navigated in the new world.
So Daniel, in terms of finance, I just want to have some ideas here to contribute to the discussion today. Yeah, so some of the ideas I believe that Joshua and Corey have mentioned before. So now for something I want to mention here about the risks, for assessing the risks, the metric we measure the risks, because the risk assessment is one of the barriers that prevent the startup or young entrepreneur to access the finance capital. And I mentioned before, following the report from the British, the startup and young entrepreneur likely got their loans being rejected by commercial banks. It's sad, but it's true, because when they assess the risk, we can see that group have a high level because they have no credit history. They don't have much collateral. Yeah, because they just set up the ideas. Some of them just graduate from high school, university. So no historical transaction. So that's a fact. So now in the solution here, I want to think about the risk management, the metrics. Instead of using the historical metric that we use everywhere now, we can think about the forward-looking metrics. The forward-looking metrics. So what does it mean? Risk management is not only based on the credit history transaction, but it's also be assessed by the impact on the environment and society. Because from my last answer before, for the survey for the people life, they have much more times about the environmental issue, social issue, compared with the older generation. So why not we use the impact is one of the main criteria for the risk assessment, and it's not based on the historical data. It's based on the forward-looking metrics. So that's the main point, number one, and also because we have the blend financing. Also, like from my answer before, if we can combine
I booked the
between the
taxi. Yeah.
venture capital and also for the bank together, they can co-lending the business. So now, if the bank they can see that the public interested in that business, so maybe the level of the capital raised by the public fund is one of the criteria, because the public investor they have quite a neutral ideas. It's not biased. They can assess the loans, the business very neutrally. So if the bank can use the crowdfunding, the capital raised by the public is one of the criteria to assess the risk. So I think it's an idea to can think about. And also in terms of the network of the education that Corey and Joshua mentioned before. So again, if we can use the support from the network, from the institution is another criteria, because when the young entrepreneurs, they can gather together in the network, they can share the ideas, they can share the opinions, and then we can gather the opinions from the network, from the hub, and then we can use that in one of the reference and criteria for assessing the risk. So I think there are the three solutions I want to mention in terms of the risk management. Yeah.
Great. Great. Thank you so much. That was very, very powerful. And I love the way you actually laid it all out, the possibilities. There was a lot of hope and truth that you spoke to how that we can really work out. And it just got me thinking about it still feels like we have a long way to go. There was still more, there's still gonna be a lot of work to be done. But hopefully we will get there, just like we've gotten through everything that I think nations and society in general has gotten through. And there is a very strong belief that if collective measures are put together, which I think the United Nations in all its full force symbolizes and represents, we could have a very swift change in a quicker time than we would even imagine. And to touch a little bit on finance, I'm gonna taking it right back again to you, Dr. Warren, or any of you on the panelists. Are there any recommendations that you could help that there are that can help bridge the gap on guarantors between the young founders, early starters? Could there be any recommendations on how that could actually? Because I think what we have in the past is mostly the regulars. It's kind of very conventional. These are all hurdles, so now they know they have to go through. But in the new world, could there be any recommendations on what that would look like?
I can start with this question. Yeah. So for the finance recommendation, yeah. So my start, yeah. So maybe trying a little order, yeah. Yeah. So I mean, like for any commercial bank or any institution that offers a loan to the market now, they need to adapt to the new market trends, to the new segment of their client in the future, or already happened already. So I think now for the financial products, or here I want to emphasize on the loans, because I think loans is much more popular than another type of finance products. Yeah. So for the loans, I think we have three area to think about. Number one, about the amount of the loans, how much money they can offer to the young entrepreneur. Number two, about the interest rate, how much they charge, or we say the price of the loan. And number three, how they can monitor the capital, so where the capital flows to. So I just mentioned one by one now. So number one, about the amount of the loan. So I think the amount of the loan is something we have to think about very seriously. And also because of some of the problem I mentioned before for the financial market, because when they assess the young entrepreneur startup, so this is the area have the maybe highest risk level. So maybe they can assess, they can train the way to calculate the amount of the loans offered to them. So if they can offer the blend products like they can co-lending with the government by the first loss capital or with the public by the venture capital. So if they let those institutions or the public, they assess, they decide how much money they want to contribute to the young entrepreneur. And from there, the bank, they can use that level and they can adjust their proportional of the loans, can offer to the young entrepreneur. But however, I mentioned before, for the venture capital market, it happened from recent years. We have the lesson from the Silicon Valley Bank. So we have to think about carefully. So just mentioned before, like let's say implement the plans, but we have to think about the way we can manage the risks. Because if something happen and it's not work well in one area, and then it can affect whole the system. And also like Corey mentioned before about resilience. If they got a mistake, how they can bounce back to the normal situation. And also the resilience is the area I'm doing the research now with another college from University of Greenwich, Dr. Antonella, Dr. Nadia, and one college from Manchester Metropolitan University, Dr. Liz Guerin. We research about the resilience of the young people. So, resilience depends on many factors: family, parent education, family income. So many social conditions can impact the resilience and on the mixed success. And I think the same happen on the out of the business. Resilience have impact on the outcome of a business as well, because we are the humans, so we can have the mistake. That's true. And if some mistake happen in their business, how they can recover their emotion. That's something we have to think about. Yeah. But now I want to go back to my question because otherwise I can go too far. Yeah. And the first area about the amount of the loans institution can offer to the young people. The second area about the interest rate. So the interest rate here, I think it's quite complex because interest rate is a function and depends on a lot of factors, not only on the people who borrow the money, but also depend on the project, what they want to do. And nowadays, we know that for United Nations and from the Loans Market Association, they have very strict regulation about how we can define green loans, green innovation. So for the green loans, any institution can borrow that. And I also have one publication on that area about green loans. And if any company can apply for green loans, and then they can have the interest rate is lower than the market, because that's how we can motivate a company to follow the green projects. But now for the young entrepreneur and for the youth generation to satisfy all these conditions, it's not easy. It's not easy, even for the big company to access to the green loan. That means they have to tick many boxes from the bank, and it's not easy for the young entrepreneur. So now I mentioned before, also relate to my opinions I mentioned before. Instead of looking at the historical metric, you can think about the forward-looking metric, about the impact rather than the historical credit or historical transaction. Because again, for the young entrepreneur, maybe it's impossible. Yeah, so the second one about interest rate, we can think about that, about the price of the loan. And the last area for the loan here, I want to mention about how we can monitor that. But I believe that nowadays, with the support of the AI blockchain, we can monitor become easier, because before we maybe have the agency problem. After we offer the loans, we don't know how they can use the money for the purpose? Is that still the same purpose when they apply for the loan, or is it different or not? But now that I believe that we have the blockchain technology. So that means like the bank, they can trace the capital. Where is the final user of that capital? Yes, so I think in some of the area we can guarantee that the young they can access the loans with maybe cheaper price to the market, and also we can monitor, support them for the use of the capital. So that's my opinion.
Right. Wow. That was really good and very deeply the way you explained it. It really did make a lot of sense. And what I could just think of and that kept on resounding was more like a systematic overhaul. And I think that's what Corey would want to Corey might want to speak true to that. So when you think about a systematic overhaul, what do you think? And now and also tied in with advocacy, how in what way can youth better advocate for what is theirs or what could potentially be theirs, collectively, not just only in sections and not just only in sizes and more from few countries, but collectively speaking through one voice for one mission and for one purpose.
Yeah, that's a big ask, right? So we have a couple things, right, that we would really hope for if we're looking for what could this new system look like and how could we make it more than what we have, right? Or what we were promised or what we grew up with, et cetera, and to make it more sustainable. And so in my experience and what I've kind of seen, again, from my international perspective, coming from the US, but again, a very rural part of the US, right, is there are, right, varying degrees of what this looks like, right, and the agency that people have, and how their community operates. What I've kind of found through my experience is kind of like these three pillars that we would really want to be focusing in for this like new system that we would think about building. And I don't think that you'll be very surprised about what they are, given what I've already spoken about today. Right. And so I think the first one we would really want to think about, and something that we're kind of starting to have conversations about in the higher education system, is really how are we measuring success, right? And so I think especially coming from an East Coast US perspective, there's a lot to be said about success being tied to economic capital. Right, but we would want to start thinking about what is a well-being economy, right? If we're thinking about and taking this perspective more of, I want the next generation to have it easier, or I want my children to have it better than I had it, right? Then we really want to start thinking about not just what is in the bank account, right? And so if we're thinking about a well-being economy, it's really the system where we're thinking not just about output, but where we can have budgets, economy, policy, and institutions that are optimizing for, right, a population's well-being, which, given the amount of resources that we have, shouldn't be hard, but that is a huge mental shift, right? And that's just the first hurdle, is a mental shift. Then you'd have all the system shift and all of those pieces right. as well. Right. But we would want to think, right, like, we know that GDP doesn't tell us whether life is improving. Oh. But I feel like when people are like, oh, I want my kids to have it better than I have, right? Or I want the next generation to have it easier. We're still tying that to GDP somehow, like subconsciously. So we want to be thinking about those well-being frameworks. And again, like I said, New Zealand does have that well-being budget. So we are seeing some of that starting to be implemented and being backed by major funding commitments. What we would want that to look like further, right, is that we want to think of mental health as an outcome and as an input to productivity, because we know that folks are performing their best when they feel their best. And that's not just physical, right? It is our environment. It is our community. It is our mental health. And that, right, can look like fund prevention in schools, communities, etc. Prevention and that social protection by design. I think, not to go off on a huge tangent here, right? But we have moved in a lot of countries, and some may equate this to like capitalism, et cetera, we've moved away from this idea of a community, and we moved away of this idea of like the village and who are your people and are you taking care of one another. And so how can we put prevention and social protection back in our design to reduce insecurity, because that's going to help with health and productivity. So how can we build these automatic stabilizing supports that are going to reduce poverty and insecurity, because we know that those are major drivers of stress and mental health, and that has negative outcomes, which really ties in to the WHO's like social determinants of health: power, money, resources, education, living and working. Those drive inequalities. And so how can we really highlight and build that in automatically? And I think one of the big pieces that's missing and that we really haven't spoken about today is actually housing insecurity. And it's something that I'm seeing a lot right now with students in university. It is the rates to me are staggering of folks. Like if you have housing insecurity and you have food insecurity, you can't think about your next exam. You're not thinking about succeeding in education because you're wondering, how are you going to survive? Where are you going to sleep? How are you going to eat? And that's not even thinking about maybe other connections that people have if they are a sibling, right? Or if they're a carer, or if they feel like they have other responsibilities outside of that. And so I think a big piece of that prevention and social protection is this idea of housing as a human right and as health policy. And that extends into our education experiences. And you can see a lot of that, again, if you look into like education in like early childhood or adolescence, that folks that have that housing insecurity or food insecurity are less likely to succeed in their educational endeavors, even very early on, right? And we know that that will have an exponential impact on those succeed in education later in life as well. So I think that's a really big piece, is that social protection and coming back into being a community-led organization, community-led, species, because I think some countries have really lost that, or some populations have really lost that. And then that last pillar that we've, again, already really highlighted is that intergenerational and climate accountability. We have to stop shifting costs forward and thinking that it's going to be not my problem, because, again, that is not a community-led value. That is an individualistically led value. And so we want to think about, how do we build into this new system that we're building? How do we build it so that it's difficult to externalize those costs for a future generation, whether that's financially, right? So that without benefit, if that's socially because we're underinvesting in them, or environmentally, again, with not paying attention to our climate impacts and our green policy. So we want to, again, kind of be thinking about those pieces if we're going to overhaul it. But I think, again, there are pieces in here that we can pick and choose, and it doesn't have to be a major overhaul to this system. And we are seeing some pieces in the in different countries, like I mentioned, Wales and New Zealand, and there are some WHO recommendations. But for me, I would say, yes, a well-being economy, ingraining prevention and social protection by design, and then really having that intergenerational and climate accountability.
Right. That's very, very profound. I love the way you actually just had all of these are summarized and all just put into. That was a very heavy question. It's just kind of interesting how you actually just had it all summarized into a very small piece of wisdom that we're all going to take home with. Now, we're almost wrapping up, and this is all going to lead us all to the very final ending. Now, before we all run up, we'll have one more each questions for Dr. Yasser and Dr. Warren. I've got one more questions for you both. But while all those questions are being answered, those of you who join in, so happy to have you guys join in. I want you guys to have your questions ready. So that will be taken in very quickly, and then we would all be so happy to have brought all of this to an end. Well, let's get in. Now, all I heard you say, Corey, was very beautifully well explained. when you talked about the insecurities, and which of course is very important. When you think about students and how housing, all of that could obviously be an issue. When you think about all of that, it also obviously plays into productivity. And whenever somebody think about productivity, I'm obviously thinking about accountability. So, Dr. Yasser, could you speak to how all of these, in which world can the youth be empowered in a way where they can hold leaders accountable for good job well done, or how things should actually be done, protecting them and making sure that all of this becomes a smooth ride? Walk us through that briefly.
Thank you so much. Well, it's an interesting question because the new generation, they are good in social media with digital things. They are super good. I think policymakers need to be careful right now because they can track reform delivery by creating public-facing, let's say, dashboards, accountability dashboards, right? And the first, well, a couple of questions we can ask here, which is, first question could be, are leaders doing what they promised? How do they do that? By collecting data, tracking budget allocation versus the distribution of the budget that they have created, the timeline, which is the most important thing of policy actions they are thinking to finish, number of youth-led initiatives formally adopted as well. All of these things can be publicly on the dashboard. So yeah, the second question is what measurable changes is showing. We can collect data on the employment of the youth, the employment rate of youth, the survival of the new startup, vocational training, how many people we can train. Again, the succession planning, they are not doing it.
Right.
And then the access to the finance, right? And then, which is the most important, who are the people are benefited from all of these things? Are we focusing on equity and inclusion, right? Gender inclusivity, rural urban disparities, and access of marginalized youth. Like direct to the point, right? The fourth one, are leaders acting with integrity? Which is the important question here. Are they transparent in their decisions? Responsive to the youth council? Are they active listener, or they're just pretending that they are listening? Publication of data. Again, sometimes people or policymakers, they will have some data. Well, they will avoid to publish it. Now, transparency in everything. Presence of youth in decision-making bodies. We can see now. Are they included? Are they actually included in making a decision? Are they empowered to make decisions? Are they trained? Are they aware of what is happening behind the scene? Or are they just sitting in the front and that's it? Yeah, so youth accountability scorecard must measure not only what leaders do, but how they behave as well, and benefit, and whether prompts translate into structural improvement or not. So basically, we have a strategy. We want to see if that strategy has been implemented or not. So to the point.
Great. That was really. You just spoke truth to that, and I think in so many ways, it's exactly what we will really hope that governance and systems and powers of change would actually do, inculcate into making all of this a wholesome experience for youth moving forward to the future. Great, thank you so much for that insight. Now we're going to go now briefly to Dr. Juan. Dr. Juan, I think what you're going to be speaking truth now to the green economy. What does that even look like? What does that even mean? That would somehow in a way tie into Dr. Roy's question that he dropped in the chat, where he really wants to know. I think it's more on reinventing the digital space and the digital world. How can youth be empowered in that sense? Are there specific trainings that could actually that are now being created for youths? Are there some now? And will there be some and more to come in the near future? Please speak truth to that briefly. Dr. One, please.
Yeah, so in terms of green training or training in all area for the sustainability. I think it's quite important. And also, when I cite some data before, so the young generation, they care more about the environment issue compared to older generation. I think it's quite obvious because they care about the environment. They have to live, they will live in the future because that's their future. So they have the demand for the market about the training. I should say the market here is, but it doesn't mean like we have the supply or demand, just like the education, they want have that education. So I think step number one, we need to establish quite solid foundation for training about the environmental issue. So for example, at our university now, we have the subject, we have the module about the green finance and sustainable finance. So that have to build up the foundation for anyone who interested into the issue because they care about the issue. Yep. So, for example, from the carbon dioxide emission, the impact, and from there they can identify the area where emit a lot of emission. Yep. Because from the natural action, like in our human activity or any animal activity, we emit the carbon emission. So that's something is unavoidable. But some area we can limit that. So I think the first step, importantly, is we need to give them the foundation, the solid foundation. Yeah. And the secondly, I think we can maybe connect and work with the government from the British business or any commercial bank who interested in supporting the ideas because in the future, this young entrepreneurs, they are the future customer. So now they need to think about how to run that business quite very well because in the future, they are the customer who borrows the bank for money, the loan from the bank. So I think now they need a strong cooperation with the government, with the commercial bank. And another point I mentioned before. So I think for the loans offered to the startup now, in thinking they are the product, the financial product, we can think they are the public goods. So the public goods are the products that in the normal situation, not much company want to provide the product because they don't bring much profit. However, think about the social welfare of a good return for investment. But in the long term, they can bring back a lot of economic social welfare. So now if we think about the loans for the young entrepreneur is a public good rather than the commercial product. So I think it can change somehow. We can set up the policy and also the terms, condition, interest rate on the products. Yeah. So and another point I want to add here, so maybe it's maybe broader area. So I just try to think about like for the economy as a whole. It's like the bottle, and so in the bottle we contain the liquid, the water. And sometimes we have a lot of liquid, sometimes we don't have much. And think about the population in the economy now, because we live in the economy, and economy, we need the infrastructure, the housing, the school, the 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 structure, that economy, the job structure, yeah, from the public sector or private sector. And to change the infrastructure, it's not easy. It takes time. However, the change in population, it happen every day, every year. So that happened the same with the example I present before. We have the water, like the infrastructure, but the population is like the liquid. Sometimes we have the redundant in the infrastructure, but sometimes infrastructure couldn't contain have enough capacity. So now I think like now for the policy for any area in finance, in economic, we should think about infrastructure in more flexible way. So because if we can have infrastructure and contain enough for the population demand, and then we can reduce the burden, we can reduce the competition. And then I believe that if the competition become less intense, and then the demand, the financing demand for any area will reduce, and then we can reduce so much burden, and especially for the young people, for the youth population. So that's my opinion.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for all of this wisdom and all of this insight you just put in. It's kind of interesting. If words and debates can actually be tangibly powerful enough to create what we really want and demand for, I'm sure that would have been the case, and the power that this debate has actually led us all to today. I could have been more grateful to all of you guys, the doctors for joining, Dr. Yasser, Corey, and Dr. Wan for joining in. You guys are amazing. You really did justice to this debate. And I'm sure that everyone who joined in would attest to that. And you've actually left us all thinking that that it is indeed a collective collaboration. We all do have a role to play. And just like what Dr. Yasser said in his opening, when he did just say that he considers himself to be very lucky because he's right in between of both generations. I think I can say that for myself as well. And I think that's just so cool that we all get to contribute. Now, before we leave, I'd like to know, is there anyone with questions? I see Dr. Roy, obviously has a question to ask. Dr. Roy, let's go for your question, please.
Yeah, hi. I'm not sure if can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Oh, okay. Okay, so thank you so much. Great job, Daniel, for setting this up. I just saw you on the platform yesterday. So for this, one of the takeaway which one of the speakers spoke about is the housing deficit with the university in Portugal and España. And I know most of the time when you have enrollment of 25,000 students, maybe the accommodations is like less than 5%, right? So new ideas around how livable or how lovable the campus should be for students to be able to live and study important. And I think university leadership should be looking at that. So I'm going to just link that to my very good friend talking about green finance in terms of how do you navigate and creatively put in policy and ideas around solving, on one hand, student housing, at the same time, creating a green finance through tree planting projects. I know this is kind of a hybrid, but I think if we keep that dot together, at the end of the day, we may have a solution. Then the big part real quick is I support some alumni organization back in Nigeria on tree planting. Is there any financial instrument whereby they could be able to get, I won't say compensation, but on the effort they're able to make? Thank you so much.
Right. So was that question directed? But there were a lot of glitches and we didn't really hear you clearly. But was that question directed? That question must have been directed. Who would that question be directed to? It probably will be. Can any one of you take that?
Yes, actually.
Was the question in line of training?
I can speak to parts of it.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Sure. Yeah. So some of the things that I'm seeing in higher education these days to tackle the housing crisis in particular is universities themselves acting as the guarantor for housing. There is a movement right now. I'm at King's College and London. And also work for the Students' Union there. And so there is a big push because other universities in London do already offer this. And it is part of your acceptance is that you can use the university as your guarantor to secure. Universities are looking at here. I don't know what that looks like globally. And again, coming from the US, it's a very different type of higher education system. With that, I would say if we're talking about like green spaces in connection to like our living spaces and being able to have those together, I mean, one of the big pieces is how is the university, how are they like reimagining spaces in really urban landscapes? Obviously, like London, it's much harder if you're in central and there's a building up for sale and needs to, buys it or leases it. Like it can be very difficult to implement those spaces as opposed to more campus style universities that are outside of cities. We're seeing a lot more of what we would call architecture as far as what it looks like on university campuses and in those communities. So they are integrating more student voice, right? We know that a lot of universities do have like a student panel. At King's, it's called the King's 100, and it's a selection of students, you to them and ask them particular questions. That's about how to use spaces or about the like one universities that's used better, right? Or more effectively to make those types of changes when we're looking at building green spaces and livable spaces. But I think it's really difficult in the very urban centers in the cities where we're seeing housing as a problem in general. And then on top of that, you can add like the influx of students and their lack of resources, right? And we've talked about kind of like the credit and not having that. And so that is a piece that I've personally experienced as an international student moving to a new country into the largest city I've ever like lived in my entire life. And how do you navigate that and get the resources needed? So there's not an easy answer, but that's kind of what my take would be. But happy for anyone to get back answer the rest of Dr. Roy's question.
Right. That was very beautiful way you pointed that out, and it just kind of made a little sense because it totally represents your current situation. So you could always speak truth to that. I couldn't because that's not my reality right now. I would have to bamboozle my way through answering the question. So yeah, cool. But this is really good, and I think we really did touch base on the very most important things, and now putting you on the focus and the center. We've done justice to this. So we have any other questions from the audience participants, please? And then the absence of no questions, we'll be so happy to bring this to a close and an end. We've done justice to this. Like I said at the beginning of today's conversation, we get to be a part of the voices, we get to contribute, and I think it was just an honor. And we want to say a very big thank you to G-SEL for having put this together. Now, this is one of G-SEL's own civic responsibility, and how G-SEL does feel like it can contribute in so many ways by recognizing and acknowledging all of these important days that the United Nations have already designated as days to be honored. So as G-SEL continues to do a whole lot more in sustainability, in education, and in energy, in the energy space, in the economy as well, this is one of the contributions and how G-SEL contributes. So it is an honor to have been a part of this, and I'm sure that we all feel the same way. We can now then officially bring this to what a perfect timing for oh wow, did you see that? I just tripped up and came right back. What a perfect timing. But in other words, this is good. The incident was a bit streaky and very, very weak at my end. And I think most of us end as well. What's happening to the UK? Yeah. So this is great. It all brings us to the end and a very beautiful wrap. Thank you all for joining in. And our gratitude to each and every one of you who joined in. Thank you. And this is it. So might as well, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you guys for all joining in. We're forever grateful. Thank you guys. Yeah.
Hi Daniel, can I have a quick chat with you after this one? Yeah. Can I have a question? Hello Daniel.
All right. See you later, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks for joining in. All right. Looking forward to another Assemble, same time, the same day next year, but it won't be the same day. It won't be the same date next year, but it won't be on the same day. Looking forward to seeing each and every one of you. Bye-bye, guys. Have a lovely...
Daniel, hello,
yes,
Daniel.
please. I can hear you.
Just a question. Yeah. So maybe can I call you privately?
Yes, you will be able to. I mean, you should have you should be able to. You drop me an email. I'll send you an email shortly now. Dr. Juan, can you hear me? I'll send you an email. I'll send you an email right away.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Oh, well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right. Have a great one, guys. Thank you guys for joining in.